All right. So good morning, Anton.
Money?
So this case, it's wine o'clock somewhere. The company, our client you're working with, is called Beer and Company, and they manufacture, distribute, and sell over 100 different varieties of beer, including lagers, pilsners, ales, and stouts in the United States. They sell to restaurants, bars, wholesale, retailers, and directly to consumers. However, recently they have been experiencing a decline in revenue across the majority of their beer products. Because of this, the vice president of business strategy has considered entering the wine market in hopes of increasing revenue and profit. The question for you is whether Beer and Company should enter the wine market.
Okay, thank you so much. Um, so did I understand it correctly that our client manufactures, distributes, and sells lots of kinds of beer to both consume directly to consumers and to other businesses, and they have recently seen a decline in revenue, and therefore they're contemplating entering the wine market.
Yeah, that's correct. Maybe I would just add that they sell, as you said, they sell to restaurants, bars, retailers, and directly to consumers.
Okay,
So they both sell to, the high end market, the low end market. They're pretty much all over the market in beer.
okay,
But you're correct. Uh, the question is whether they should enter wine market in order to, I guess, um, try to increase the revenue back.
I see. And do they have a specific goal for when they want to enter or not? How big revenues are they looking for or profits?
Um,
Something like that.
yeah, I think that's on you to determine. That's you to determine.
Okay. Um, Great. So can I have a few minutes to
Of course,
consider?
of course.
Okay. So my hypothesis is that they should enter the wine market, and I would like to look into that by looking into the profits that they could gain, um, and after afterwards, I would like to look into the potential investment costs.
Okay. Uh, do you have any other points that you would want to look into to determine how they could enter the wine market?
Okay, so how they could enter the wine market, then I would like to look at the customers, what their uh, needs are, and also what the market looks like, if it's fragmented or
Mhm.
I mean, in terms of customers, if they have a lot of bargaining power or not. Then I would like to look into our own, the client's company, how well, how much of their current competencies that they could use in the wine market too, and their current distribution channels. And then I would finally want to look into the competition, if it's monopoly or if it's a fragmented competition. And it would also be interesting to look at other similar companies and uh, compare with their strategies.
No, that sounds great. That sounds great. So, right, let's begin. But I think before we should decide whether they should enter or not, you might want to determine the market of wine in the U.S. So, do you just want to start with that?
Okay, sure. Okay, so market of wine in the U.S. And do you want the answer in US dollars?
Yes.
I suppose. Okay.
Yes, correct.
So there are 300 million inhabitants in the U.S.
Yeah, we can see that.
And if we assume they're evenly distributed between 0 and 80 years, then 75% of these are above 20.
Why do you assume 80, by the way?
80 years old?
Yeah.
I think that's close to the average, how long people on average live.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So, then approximately we have 75% of these who are allowed to drink alcohol.
Don't you want to just draw it out so I can see better?
Yeah, sure. So we have 300 million inhabitants, and 75% of these are allowed to drink alcohol. So then we arrive at 225 million. And so these are all the people allowed to drink wine in the US, but it's not reasonable to think that all of these people will buy wine. So we could, I would suggest a segmentation depending on how much wine these people drink. And I mean, if we were doing this, we could look into data, but let's just suggest a distribution of 20% who don't drink wine, 60% who drinks 1 bottle per week, and 20% drinking 3 bottles per week.
Okay. And how have you come up with this distribution? What's the logic behind it?
Well, actually, it's just based on my personal. Since I have no data in this case, or do we have any data?
No, actually, we don't have any data. I was just interested in
Yes,
the logic
yes,
behind
so,
it. That's completely
okay,
fine when it's on subjective
Okay,
experience.
so
But would you have any? When will you have any data, or where would you look for data potentially? You know, if you let's say if you would have access to internet or to resources, where would you look to find this data?
On how much wine an
right.
average person drinks. So I'll look into maybe if there is a statistics department in the US, at least in Sweden, we have one, and then I would also look into data from wine business organizations.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Okay, so if we assume this distribution, 0 bottles per week and 1 bottle per week, 3 bottles. Then our 20% drinks 0 bottles per week. Our mid drinker drinks 225 million times 0.6. So here we arrive at 20 plus 12 plus 3. So 135 million bottles per week.
You sure about this number?
Yes, that should be right.
All right, that's correct.
Okay, and then for our frequent users, we arrive at 225 times 0.2, so that's 45. 45 times 3, so that's 135. Bottles per week, and we arrive at a total of 270 million bottles per week. And if we want the amount of bottles in a year, we would have to multiply by 52, and then we arrive at a number of 200. So that's 5. Okay, so if we multiply by 50, use that approximation.
Yeah, that's good.
We arrive at a figure of 13,500 million bottles per year, which is of course 13.5 billion.
Alright, what does this tell you about the wine market?
This is how many bottles one could sell.
But we also need to determine the price.
Exactly. So so to do that, we can segment the market into cheaper wines and more expensive ones.
Okay.
And let's say a cheaper wine, half of the wine market, retails at 7. Okay, actually, to do this properly, we would maybe want to segment into wholesales and consumer sales. Would you advise that?
That sounds correct, but maybe for this case, you can just estimate the average bottle of wine.
Okay.
So to make it easier.
So I'll average a bottle of wine at $10.
That's maybe too cheap.
Okay.
Let's just go with
15. So $15, and then we have the wine market is worth 30.5 billion times 15. So it's 135 plus. Okay, so 67.5. And we arrive at the total figure of 200. 202.5 billion. So 202.5, 202 billion US dollars.
Yeah, that sounds great. What does this number tells you?
So this is the total worth of the market.
Okay.
And would you want to know the market that our client could capture, or
I'm more asking how do you think so far, based on what we've done, do you think the client still should enter? Is this interesting market for the client based on the number that you have?
in order to determine that, we would have to look into how big market share our client could capture, because the in the bottom line, the important thing is how much revenues our client could capture, but it looks like a significant market, so it would be worth investigating further.
All right, sounds good. What if I tell you the top 3 players in the wine market have 80% of the market share? So top 3 players have 80% of the market share. What does this tell you about the barriers to entry? And what are some examples of barriers to entry in this market?
Okay, so the top 3 players have 80% of the market, so that's just a literature poll, and then that would suggest that the current players already have a lot of power. And if we, what was your question again?
What does this tell you about the barriers to entry, and what are some examples of those barriers in the wine market?
Okay, so it would suggest barriers of entry, high barriers of entry, because if there were no barriers of entry, then probably the market would be more fragmented, and barriers of entry could be distribution channels. In the retail market. It's very important with how your goods are shelved, and then it's for the producer, it's very important with the relationship to the distribution channels.
That's a perfectly valid answer. But if we move on, we can firstly look at the current capabilities of Beer and Company, of our client. And do you think there are any synergies that can be realized from producing beer and producing wine?
So we're only looking at the production part now?
Yes, or we're looking at any possible synergies. So that can be in a production as well, but it can be also in the logistics. It can be in distribution. Do you think there are any synergies between production of wine and production of beer, and then the subsequent distribution?
Yes, I think that sounds reasonable. There are different products, but they're still in alcoholic beverages, so I think there would be synergies in production.
What makes you say that? What makes you say that?
Well, okay, so they're different products, so maybe not in the production, but I think there would be synergies in the overhead organization, and especially in the distribution, because many customers of beer are also customers of wine, so the company could leverage their sales with their current distribution channels, and potentially just upsell their customers with wine too.
Okay, all right. But let's say now the Vice President of Business Strategy just walked into the room and wants the preliminary summary and recommendation of what you've learned so far. What do you say?
So we've recognized that there is a big market, but it's also dominated by 3 players, and the barriers of entry are probably significant, and therefore I would, because the market is big and thus potentially profitable, I would suggest looking further into it, into the opportunity. But it is also fragmented, so I would not advise entering as of now.
Thank you, Anton. Sounds great. Thank you for your time.